All right, I'm here with Vanity once again, and you're fresh off your vacay. You went to Playa del Carmen in Mexico with your girlfriend, and do you feel how do you feel? How did it do the trick? Obviously, you've had a lot of stressful months, and you've been grinding, and so it must have felt pretty good to finally just unwind a little bit.
Yeah, it's pretty nice to not have to worry about anything. I guess it's like the first time I've completely tried to decompress, and I think it worked pretty well. So I mean, it was beneficial, I think.
Yeah, it's something that like it's a difficult one, like the whole decompressing thing, because I feel like when you're a competitor, like the kind of, I feel like all you know how to do in some cases is like solve problems by grinding or working more. Because if you don't get like a desired result, then that's kind of a huge motivator to. I mean, it's a self perpetuating kind of situation. You don't get the result that you wanted, so you put in more work, and you kind of get trapped into this sometimes. I feel like a lot of players can get led into burnout. Is this something that for you has been difficult to manage throughout the year of VCT with Valorant, or like how has that management been in terms of avoiding a burnout situation for you?
I don't know. I've always worked pretty hard, but relative to like a lot of the people like within like even back in Counter Strike, I always played probably 100 hours last 2 weeks, which I feel like isn't super like common, at least in like NA pro scene. In Europe, maybe it's a little more common, but I also think I don't know. Like I've never really faced burnout in my career. If I, I don't, I can't recall like a single time that I've ever like felt burnt out. But I also have. This is like the highest level I've ever competed at consistently. So I mean, maybe it'll happen in the future, but I don't think it will. But it's hard to know. But I think I do a pretty good job at like managing it and knowing like when to take time off. Like I usually don't touch my computers like 1 day a week. So I think that kind of helps me manage it a lot better than like some people who are like 12 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Yeah, I think this is something I think we briefly brought up last time. Is sort of your tendencies sort of in and out of the game and how you sort of support yourself as a competitor. I mean, there's obviously been a lot of talk around VCT with regards to practice. It came up, and I think maybe in some senses, it came up because initially as an explainer as to
Mm.
why did NA do as badly as they did, given how we expected them to do going into it with Sentinels and Envy and so on. And I mean, I feel like you guys kind of performed as maybe expected overall, like had a strong solid run, but it was Sentinels and Envy that were pulled into question, and then the whole practice thing came into question with Sentinels because they were on the spotlight. And of course, you in your interview kind of
Yeah.
you just called out the elephant in the room in saying that Sentinels don't practice enough. And obviously for anyone, it's plain to see that, okay, well, they're streaming a lot, so it's a question that's interesting because it also brings into question, if we go into a nuanced discussion, like what is the best way to practice, and are they practicing too little? Is it like how much do you need to practice for it to be effective? How different should it look team to team? Gambit stats going out there that they've played, on average like 3.2 games a day the whole year. So like, where do you stand by the things that you said, first of all, and secondly, what is your stance on how much practice is actually necessary, and are people being overly critical of this in the community?
Um, I definitely think people are overly critical because I think that just because the way someone does it doesn't mean everyone has to do it that way. Yeah, like there's probably like everyone should be practicing like scrimming, like doing like offline stuff with each other. I think at least, obviously, I think most players would agree. But I mean, I don't really think it's like maybe it's blown out of proportion, maybe it's not. But it's like maybe people's priorities just change, right? Like it's impossible to know. Like there's not like black and white answers to any of this. So I think it's pretty important to like consider the fact that maybe there's like uh things going on behind the scenes that people aren't aware of. So it's not worth like attacking these people for it. It's not like they. It's not like I think the NA had like a weird rough, not rough, but like because of Berlin. So after Berlin, I think what teams win? 100 Thieves, Sentinels, Envy, and I think that 100 Thieves made the weird roster change
Yeah.
like right before the LCQ. So maybe there was like a month or something where they didn't really know what was going on. Then they had like a week to scrim with Boy. Envy took a pretty substantial break. Like we didn't start scrimming them until the LCQ started. I think was about the right time. And then I don't think we scrimmed Sentinels once, but I mean that's just them. I've never streamed them a lot in this game, anyways. So I'm not sure, but it's like, and then all the teams at LCQ didn't want to play us, so it's like, who are we supposed to stream? Like tier 4 teams. So we started like lowering our practice days, like pure man hours, I guess, and more so when it's like the theory idea, like the theory and stuff of it, more so than just playing like scrims to scrim. Because like I think the way that like a lot of the North American teams play, it's not. And honestly, it's not even. It's even the European teams were scrimming. Like this, the practicing against players that you're just like mechanically better than is kind of rough to like figure out what's working and what's not working. And I think that when you get down to like the lower levels of Valorant, regardless of like the region, you can just like skill diff the teams and you're not really sure if what you're doing is right because maybe someone just gets like a 4K that'll never happen against like a top tier team. So I think it's difficult to like completely rationalize it, but I mean, I don't really think that like North Americans are practicing less or anything across the board. I think it's just people are, people like to talk, so it is what it is. Like America is sucking a lot of shit, like going into like the other events. I mean, I think we kind of deserve it, but with how close the matches were, I'm not really sure. It's the same thing like when Sentinels won Iceland. I didn't really like how people were saying NA dominance. It's like, dude, like the maps they were winning were fucking insanely close. It's like the same way that we lost in every event. Like all the regions are really, really close. So I think it's kind of like odd, I guess. Maybe they had a better head-to-head here, but it's just odd to me how like you're gonna say like a region is better than the other, but you look at like the matches that the regions play, and I think the only one that was a dominant fashion was Envy versus Ascend out of any of the NA versus EU matches that's ever been played. I could be wrong with that, but I think that's like the only one that's been really one-sided.
I mean, it's one of those things, isn't it? Like when you're looking at anything that gets into the public, it just tends to immediately become polarized, and all nuance is just out the window.
Anyone that tries to make any logic behind it is just nothing happens, and then if you say something absurdly stupid, like you're gonna get some reaction. So
yeah.
Nobody likes rationalization. They just like one end or the other.
It is an interesting one. I think it's something that's fun because of course there are some individuals in the community that I think play really well to this effect, because sports are awesome because there's drama around them. That's part of the thing that people like, is that they get, this drama that you can get caught up in, and it feels really real because it's not, obviously it's real people doing things, and you're getting to follow that story, and it doesn't feel kind of fake, maybe like some kind of fictional play or something that you're watching on television. It's a real thing, so people get really caught up in it. And I think that line between how much of this is just entertainment and kind of theater versus how much of this is actually real can sometimes get a little bit blurry. And I think that's when, of course, you get to a situation where with some players as well, maybe that they won't be able to deal with this as well, so feelings will get hurt, and that maybe even may affect them. Or similarly, you could get a situation where they'll do things that maybe are irresponsible, or whatever it is. But it's a hard line to walk, understanding that this is entertainment to a degree. For example, I think you were the one that tweeted out just saying, hey, most of the pros are basically just friends. Like 99% of people are just friends and get along really well. So just bear that in mind. And but how do you feel about being in this kind of environment where there's more of a spotlight on the kind of trash talking and the drama of esports?
I don't know. I like it. I think it's entertaining. Like watching matches and like hearing people yell. Obviously, playing on stage is really cool because like you can see like people like standing up and stuff like that. It's really cool. I mean, some fans don't like it because they're like, if you have emotions, you're cringe. What is wrong with you? Just weird. I mean, dude, we're also an entertainment factor, like you said, right? It's not just gameplay, because I feel like if it was purely just gameplay, then like the viewership of it would probably tank a lot if there's no personalities involved. And I think the personalities do make the scene that at like a certain level, right? Like you have to have both, but I think if it's just purely gameplay, it's harder for people to become like attracted to you, I guess. I don't know if that's the right word, but I think that's the right word.
Yeah, it's like so much easier to relate to, to people like,
showing emotion versus someone that's just like completely stoic the entire time. Like obviously there's going to be people who like both ways, but I think it's a lot easier to relate to someone personally that shows emotion versus someone that's kind of like Nats, I guess, who doesn't really like have like emotions when he's playing. Like I'm more of a fan of like Redgar or something, or like Shadows, who like they get super into it. But I mean, everyone's different, obviously, so it's not like it's like black and white. Like you don't need to like one or the other. But I think they both have their own place, and it's really good. It's like healthy for the esport like viewership to have both.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's definitely another thing too that is culturally something you can relate to too. Like certain players from certain cultures are going to be a bit different in how they handle things.
Yeah,
Like seeing Yampy as a Finn, just like super reserved. But
absolutely
then
no emotion.
yeah, but then you do see him pop off, and then I really like hearing him like scream. I don't know. I think maybe in the semi match, or maybe it was the quarters against you guys. He like had this most guttural, visceral scream, like it was just this pure emotion coming out and pure relief.
Yeah.
It's like wow, that's coming out of Yampy. That feels more significant because if you know how he is, so yeah, I totally agree. I think honestly, we're really lucky in Valorant so far because I think we've got a really good mesh of personalities. It's not kind of boring, like you said. It's not like everyone's trying to play it by the book, but people are not afraid to be themselves, which is good. And it seems like the camaraderie at the events between the teams is pretty high as well, which is also really cool to see.
Yeah. Like I feel like the most turmoil you'll get is between the regional teams, honestly. Like so if like regional lands come back, I feel like that's like when the actual like people are trash talking each other and they're like meaningful behind it. But internationally, I feel like we don't interact with them enough for there to be much meaningful like trash talk, I guess.
Yeah.
But like if regional lands come back frequently, I think that might be like people are a lot more invested into the teams that they play more consistently.
Yeah. I mean, one thing I wanted to actually bring up here as well is, what are your thoughts on the trash talking situation with zombs, for example, after the
That's too
Sentinels
much.
Furious situation? That's the line.
Just it's just different. Like the players can trash talk each other. I think that's fine, but there's no reason to like trash a nation. This just doesn't make sense to me at all.
Yeah. I think
I
it's.
mean,
Oh, go ahead.
yeah, I don't. I mean, obviously, like I dealt with it, so obviously I'm gonna be like kind of like cautious. But like regardless, I just feel like it's completely unnecessary to attack like a region versus
Mhm.
like you're just talking like trash in like the game. I think it's completely different.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting or important, I should say, to also remind people a little bit of the context here as well, because I think that some people are also being too hard on Zoms in a certain respect. Is how I felt. I mean, obviously there's a range of reactions to it, but I think Zoms is a pretty young guy first of all, and that secondly, the nature of the situation is quite different when we have had the Brazilian fandom coming into these situations. It is, you can get nuked by so many people, and I've been on the receiving end of that before as well, where I didn't like cast something correctly according to I think to somebody, and I just had loads of people like just going onto my Twitter, responding to things, telling me I'm like shit at casting basically, and it's like being really mean and just like it's and so I can only imagine that situation for Sentinels in the position where they hadn't actually done anything wrong, and they must have been receiving. I don't know precisely what they're receiving, but if you're receiving like let's say death threats from like hundreds of unknown people that you've got no connection to, I can imagine that it's difficult to respond to that mentally, and to not be affected by that mentally is going to be different for everybody. And I kind of interpreted Zom's reaction to, he's not going to just take a beating without giving something back. And because there's no one in general for him to like give it back to, it's like, well, I have hundreds of people messaging me from this place. So that's how that seemed to have come across, because he didn't want to take it lying down. So it's like I understands what happened based on the fact that he's a human being, and the situation's difficult to deal with. And I can imagine some people that could just mentally boom you out of an event, honestly.
Yeah, no. I mean, I completely understand it, but it's just, I feel like at some point you can like rationalize to yourself that it's probably not the best idea. That's like more so what I'm saying. Like,
no, I do agree with you. I think it's just worth sort of thinking about all the elements at play, because I think it is one of those things where it's a tough situation.
You have to understand like the human aspect behind it. It's like he's getting attacked by probably thousands of people, hundreds of thousands, hundreds or thousands. So it's like, yeah, maybe there's something going on, and then he doesn't want to just sit there like you were saying. But either way, I mean, I don't know. It's tough.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it could have been a lot worse, honestly. Like, it could have been significantly worse. Ultimately, I
Yeah,
think,
yeah, yeah.
I think it kind of the situation handled itself ultimately after that exchange in a way, like it kind of what's the way to describe it? It kind of like neutralized itself. The situation kind of neutralized like fairly quickly without anything getting too out of hand. And I think
Yeah,
that
yeah.
it seemed okay ultimately in how things ended up happening. And there was obviously a discourse between the Brazilian community and professionals and stuff. So it kind of
Yeah,
felt like
yeah.
it kind of handled itself. But yeah, I just wanted to. I'm not condoning what he did. I just wanted to sort of leave a comment on it because someone is a human being and what was happening is like an extraordinary situation. And I think like I was posing to you too, for a lot of competitors, this is in Valorant esports, this is the biggest thing that they've done for a lot of for the majority of competitors. So it's suddenly
Yeah.
all this sudden spotlight is kind of crazy. How do you feel about that, by the way? Because you have been someone that has seemingly embraced the spotlight in many respects. And is it something that you kind of feed off of, or is it something that's just is it part of the job for you and you're just kind of embracing it like that? Or do you prefer to focus on just the game and the results?
I like both. I mean, I think it's really cool to have so many people supporting you. Like, I don't know. Um, I guess because like I was always like an underdog in Counter Strike my entire career. I mean, pretty similar here, right? Like we're not like the best team in our region, but I think being like like in the top three of your region versus being like eighth or like I don't know, like fourth through like eighth is a lot different than being like a top three team in your region. So hopefully we can keep it up. But I mean, I think it's pretty important to engage with like the fan base. Not everyone thinks that way, obviously, but it's pretty important to me to maintain like a relatively genuine connection with like the people that are supporting you.
Do you have any? Is there anyone in esports that you look to and feel like they do that sort of stuff very well?
Steel. I mean, funnily, yeah. I guess he'd have to be like the one, right? I feel like he's got to be one of the longest standing like people that has consistently streamed throughout his entire esports career, at least as long as I've been around. I feel like even like after the ban, he was still streaming. Like we weren't friends, and I didn't really know him back then, but he was still like there. And I can't really think of anyone that compares, honestly. Like streaming, like connecting with the community, I don't think there's anyone because even he was doing YouTube videos to help people learn and stuff like that. I can't. I genuinely, I don't think there's anyone that's done anything remotely close to that.
Do you sort of draw some inspirations from Steel? I know you have like a pretty close friendship with him.
I don't know, inspiration. I guess, sure, a little bit, but I think a lot of it's self-driven. But I mean, I think some of it might come from seeing him do it and seeing it like it is beneficial to interact with people, even if it's not always like the most pleasant experience. But a lot of the time, it's relatively pleasant. So I mean, there's not much to complain about.
Do you have any mentors in esports or in general outside of esports, perhaps as well?
Not really, no, I don't think so. Um, I guess my uncle would be like the only one.
What do you
But
like? How does that relationship? How is that relationship beneficial for you in terms of your kind of development?
I don't know. I just kind of like when I was growing up, he was like the person that I looked up to. So I guess idol or modeling myself after him was more so what it was. But in esports, no, not really anybody that's like ever stood out like from like a personality or anything. Like I've looked up to Glaive like my entire career, but that's more so like a gameplay and like a leadership thing more so than like personality development.
And with in terms of like what you're getting from your uncle, there is it what stands out? If there was like a couple things in terms of like what stands out that's important to you in terms of stuff that you want to emulate or perhaps principles that you admire. What would that be?
I mean, I think one of the most admirable traits is like the selflessness he has. Pretty much is one of the things I think that I've took from him. That's probably the main one.
And like, how does that sort of like come out for you? Is that something that is it plays into your dynamic as a team leader, or how does that kind of affect you as a competitor?
Um, I don't know necessarily how it like affects me as a. I mean, I think I'm pretty selfless as a teammate, but I don't know if that comes from watching him do that in like real life to like other people and stuff like that, or if it just happened. I'm not really sure to be honest, but maybe it has a play. It probably has some like aspect of play in it for sure. I would if I had to guess. I
like
don't
an
think there's like
empathetic
direct
type of
correlation
thing.
1-to-1. Yeah, I think like empathy is probably a good way to describe it.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because definitely I'm a believer in the fact that the people that we spend time around and the those that we choose to include in our company as much as possible, like the kinds of things we're reading. There's that old saying, I forget how that quote goes. It's you're the sum of the five people you hang around with the most, the books you read, and something or other. So,
Yeah,
just that kind of
something similar,
concept.
yeah.
And speaking of books, actually, I usually do ask people about this. I don't know if we talked about it in the last time we spoke, but is there anything that you're reading or anything that you've read that for you has been particularly impactful?
And I think we went pretty in depth into this last time, but it was
Oh, we
like the
did.
sports of itself. Yeah. I think we talked about this for like 30
Oh, of
minutes.
course, yeah, of course, because I
Yeah.
remember now because there was a title of a book that you
I
couldn't
couldn't
remember
really.
until later on. Yeah, I remember.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
there you go. My memory is absolutely garbage.
I have it
Okay,
right there.
nice,
I can't read. I have really bad eyesight. I think it's the third from the left.
awesome, nice. Yeah, you were boot camping last time, so you can just like conveniently
Yeah.
pull it out. Yeah, well, that's awesome. We won't rehash that then. That's my mistake. So bad podcast host, DDK. But moving forward, then in terms of taking the experiences that you've had, obviously going through VCT the entirety of last year, you've had a vacation. At what point do you sort of reflect on what you need to do differently this year? Or if there's anything you need to do differently, or have you done that reflection, and what is the result of that if you have?
I think like the biggest thing that I realized was at events. I guess not at events, because I think it was just this event. I was kind of bad individually, and I think it's because I wasn't playing as much ranked. But I think I was kind of like telling myself I'm not gonna play ranked because I'm not streaming. But like it was completely capable of it. I just kind of, I don't know. I don't know if it was laziness or what, but I think I don't really like EU ranked, but I just need to make myself do it so I can stay like on form individually. So that's like the biggest thing I think that I self-reflected on towards the end of this year.
Gotcha. That's an interesting question as well in terms of the crossover for people in terms of improving themselves, because obviously a lot of people will be adamant and say, hey, you can't become a better Valorant player for competitive if you're practicing by playing ranked. Obviously it's one piece of the puzzle. So what do you think about like what you're actually like, what is the value of actually getting out of ranked? How do you distill that into something that's actually useful when you go and play ranked?
I mean, I think the biggest thing that like helped me in ranked is just like keeping like my mechanics at like a capable level. I felt like I was pretty not bad, but below like where I'm capable of playing in Berlin or Champions, which I mean, it happens. You're not always going to be in like your peak performance, but I think that's why I was playing worse. Maybe it's not. Maybe I was just having an off event, but I think that's like the biggest difference between like my performance in the LCQ and then my performance in Champions was like I wasn't playing as much as I usually do, which I think plays a factor in me performing a little bit worse.
Gotcha. I mean, do you attribute the, let's say, the losses that you experienced at Champions to maybe some lack of individual form, or is there other pieces that are more important?
I wouldn't say that we lost because I was off individually. I mean, maybe it would have helped, but I don't think that's why we lost. I was just kind of disappointed with how I played. I
Gotcha.
think I think we played pretty fine the entire event. Like I think we had I think Zeppa had the worst series he's ever had in his entire FPS career. So I mean, it is what it is. Like it sucks, but I think we'll be completely fine as long as we keep putting in like the same amount of effort that we've been doing. And I'm pretty happy with where we're at right now and the trajectory that we're on.
Yes. So I actually have an interesting topic here that I've been thinking a lot about, which when I was at Champions, I heard this thing, and I'm not going to call out anybody in particular because it's not about calling out anybody, but it's something that players do. It's like a behavior pattern that you see with players and people in general. So after let's say having let's say a game where the outcome is not favorable, you lose or you played poorly or whatever it is, sometimes people will say, it's an off day, and I feel like this is dangerous because it's to say something's an off day is coping, and when you're coping, to cope is really to live in an illusion in reality, because for example, you could say it's an off day, but in reality, something did go wrong. So it's either you weren't prepared enough, you didn't sleep well enough, or there's an issue in maybe there's an issue in your setup, maybe there's an issue in your mental game. Like there's something that's going on there. Maybe there's a team dynamic issue. There's something that's going on there. But I feel like if you say it's an off day, you're basically closing the book on what could be an important lesson if you face the hard truth of that lesson, because that hard truth may mean that you're not good enough, or may mean that you need to do something that you're very bad at doing and you need to get better at that thing, and that's not a nice thing to have to confront. So in terms of being specific, in terms of like Cloud9's performance, have you guys like really dissected this, or what are your thoughts in general of the copium that players go through? Because I think some players are better than others.
I think on this team we actually are pretty good at not completely just shutting the door on things like that. Personally, I feel like we do a pretty good job at like discussing what went wrong, how we can fix it, and I think it's probably the best environment I've ever worked with, like as an IGL. Like I think all 5 of us are pretty good at it. I mean, sometimes obviously you're gonna have like days where like maybe you slept like bad, so you're not gonna be as receptive. But I think like generally, I think we're pretty good about it. I don't really like have many complaints. I think our coaches are pretty good at keeping us like on top of not just like writing it off as like, oh, we just had a bad day. I think our coaches do a really good job at like keeping us on top of communicating through like the issues that we're having, or like the rounds that break down and like how they break down, and like trying to figure out how we can do things optimally. So I mean, still pretty excited. I think we did a good job, and obviously I don't think we're at like 100%, but I'm just pretty happy with how we played at the tournament, given it was 2 of their first LAN events ever, which is pretty insane.
Yes, yeah, for sure. Like at least first international LAN ever, which those are not easy to perform well on, I feel like. I think, for those, if anyone who's experienced a first international LAN, it's challenging. I remember choking very badly at my first international LAN ever. It was a horrendous story. It haunts me to this day. I like lost to a player I should not have lost to against, and it was a very arrogant North American player as well, so it made it even worse. And I blew like a 15-point lead, or so. I had this. I got basically what TenZ was experiencing at Champions. It was very similar to that. When I like watched him play, and I like see him just look like a completely different player. He's at like the bottom end of his C game there. He's like totally just mentally gone. And I completely like I felt that, and it's the worst feeling ever. You feel like completely powerless. The only thing that you have the power to do is to play shit. Like that's the only thing you can do. You get to this far gone point. So I mean that's what can happen on people's first international LANs, because there's all these new things that are coming into play. And I think the TenZ thing we can talk about a little bit as well if you want to, because obviously TenZ is an interesting one, but we'll go back to that in a moment. So I agree. I think you guys did a great job considering how difficult the competition was, how unknown a lot of the competition was, because Valorant's different too. And this is another thing I wanted to ask you about, which is in Valorant, you don't get to play against the teams you're going to be playing against at these massive tournaments. Yeah, almost like ever. Like you guys, that was your first time playing Liquid, right? That was the first time you ever played Liquid. So
I played them in Iceland, but yeah.
In Iceland, of course, but that was version 1, right? So
yeah. It's a completely different group. It was just me personally, but yeah, it's like, I don't know. I'm honestly really happy with how like we handled all of like I think given like also like the COVID stuff that was going on in like Berlin, and like all the behind the scenes stuff, like that event was odd. Probably like the most interesting thing I've ever experienced in esports. Like honestly, in a bad way. Like I feel like it's kind of hard mentally. It's just like, obviously we're gamers. We don't really go outside that much, but like just being stuck in the same 2 rooms, it's kind of like mentally taxing. Obviously everyone's going through it, so like it's not like an excuse, but I don't think that every team showed their complete best form given like the COVID circumstances around it. So I mean, yeah, it is what it is though. I think we did a pretty good job at dealing with it, and I don't think there's much to be disappointed with.
Yeah, I definitely concur. The fact of the matter is as well as that, like it was pure darkness as well. There was no sunlight in Berlin. There's none. dark.
Like maybe 2 or 3 hours a day. Other than
Yeah.
that, I feel like it was like really cloudy or like gloomy. Which I mean, it affects people differently. Like if you're not from like a climate like that, it's obviously gonna be a lot more mentally taxing. But I don't know. It's
Yeah.
okay. Like we still get to travel the world and play video games, so it's
Yeah.
something we're gonna hopefully it goes away in the future. Maybe that'd be nice, but I mean, it is what it is, and I think we did a lot better job at dealing with it than a lot of the other teams in the competition.
Well, this is like such a great point because it's one of the reasons I love like competing and just like why LAN is so important is because you gotta like you got to get to a point where you get this like mastery over your own performance and like complete wildly different environments. So you got to figure yourself out to a degree where you're going to be good no matter how the environment is.
Yeah.
And that's like really challenging to get to that. It's like one thing being in your bedroom all the time where everything is the same and
Yeah.
consistent, but being that player that can just be anywhere in the world and still be able to kind of hit your peaks, that's a really difficult level to get to, and it takes
Yeah.
a lot of awareness, like good support around you, and experience doing it, and that's not an overnight thing. So yeah, that this event, like you're totally right. When I was looking at this event,
I think a lot
it's
of it
crazy
came down.
challenging.
I think like the mental aspect was a lot harder than anyone really anticipated. Not even just us, like everyone, because I don't really think because when we got there, like the first, I don't know when you got there. I think the first week we were in quarantine. So day 0 to day 5 or 6, we were in quarantine. After that, we were allowed to go outside, and I think 2 days after we were allowed to like go to like restaurants or something. Then we got completely locked down because I think someone tested positive for COVID completely. I think it might have been Food or Victor, sorry. And then I don't know if that was the exact catalyst in like the lockdown happening, but it was a close timeline, so maybe it was, maybe it wasn't, but it also could have just been like the spiking COVID cases in Berlin. But yeah, so it's like we're told we have like 5 or 6 days of quarantine. We get out, and then we're like, wait, just kidding, you guys are stuck inside the hotel again. But I mean, I don't know. I think a lot of teams had a tough time dealing with it. So it's interesting. Like this entire COVID thing kind of throws like a wrench in like what everyone thinks is gonna happen.
Yeah, I think that is. I'm glad that we're talking about this because this is something that I don't think people really talked about very much, but it does make a significant difference on everything.
Mhm.
That the event was mentally very challenging compared to like how an average event is. There was a
Yeah.
lot of things there that was very difficult because it's not just the lack of sunlight, which is a real problem, especially for, like you said, those that are coming from climates where there is a lot of sunlight and their bodies are used to it. Because for
Yeah.
example, like I know that there's been I'm not going to pull random like science out of my ass, but I know that it is the case that people from the Nordics that are from regions where there are like extended periods with or without sunlight, some have more resilience in terms of stuff like jet lag and stuff like their circadian clock getting affected by stuff like this. And obviously,
Yeah.
our bodies are very complicated, but like you said, people do manage it differently based on where they're from. And but generally speaking, like it's not, you didn't have the sunlight, the food options were limited, especially if you're quarantining, so you can't get the stuff in your body that's going to make your gut kind of feel
Yeah.
happy, because a lot of Korean players will actually bring their own food because the food is so different around the world
Yeah. Yeah.
that
Yeah.
your
Yeah.
gut is not going to do
I
stuff
was
as well.
talking to, well, our GM is Korean,
Awesome.
and or sorry, no, our senior GM Galen was with our League of Legends team at Worlds, sorry, and she said that a lot of the Korean teams brought like rice cookers, which I think the teams and champions don't do that. As far as I'm aware, I think they just bring like pre-cooked rice that they can heat up, which I mean, it makes sense, right? Like the cuisine is so different in like places. But I think that's something that's interesting that I didn't really know was a thing, but it's interesting to hear about, and honestly, it probably is something we might look look into going forward. Like the keeping somewhat relatively consistent like meals
Yeah.
would, I think, be kind of important.
Yeah, it's definitely a big deal. Like I had this like crazy stint once where I was going from LA to China, for like a 16-hour flight from LA to China, and then to Shanghai. Then I was there like broadcasting, almost day of arrival. Did like 5 days in a row, and it was like really long days because a couple, like actually like three members of talent actually like somehow didn't get to the event, so I had to do more shifts with James. So we're doing like 2 to 3 best of threes in CS a day for 5 days.
Yeah,
And on the fifth day, we had to fly that same day from the studio to Mumbai, but there's no direct flight. So then it was like an 8 hour flight to Singapore, and then a connection from Singapore back to Mumbai, and then the landing on media day. So no sleep, just gonna go into media day there for like a few days to do this thing in India, then fly directly from there back to LA. I was in LA for half of a day and I had to fly to Miami. And so like this is just like this crazy travel. And I was like, oh my god, this is gonna destroy me.
Yeah.
So I messaged someone who's been on my podcast a few times. In fact, that's how the friendship started. I met him at an event, an ECS event called Taylor Johnson, and he was a performance coach for the 49ers. Yeah, and I was like, Taylor, you got to help me, man. Like, what do I do to not get absolutely fucked on this trip? Like, how do I do this? And so he gave me these protocols of like how to manage the jet lag, like, basically stuff like, fast the entire flight to Shanghai, like eat when you get there, like just tips on how I should do water consumption, specific timings on eating and also exercise, as well as like a shit ton of varying supplements to make sure that my gut health was going to be okay, and just like all of the timings, which was like one of the really important things. And I didn't feel the jet lag at all. I felt absolutely amazing by doing everything that he said. I felt amazing. And then I tried this again and it worked. I was like, okay, I got to try this again, but just do whatever the fuck I want and just like throw all this out the window and just see what happens. And the next time I did like this like long haul international stuff and I didn't do any of these protocols, I was wrecked again. So it's like it's this doing all the things right does actually have a significant impact.
Yeah, it does. I think it's pretty underlooked in esports because like, oh, we're just playing a video game, but it's like it's just people's livelihoods. I feel like it should be taken a little more seriously than it is.
And the just like the brain fog is like the worst thing ever, and like jet lag can really can really wreck you. Yeah, it's tough, man. That's what I think is interesting too, because the development of players. I do wonder for a lot of the top teams if they really. I say I wonder. I have a strong suspicion that with most top teams, they don't have anywhere near what should be in place to develop teams and players correctly.
I think probably the only one that did it at like a really like they got into like the micro of it was probably 100 Thieves.
Yeah,
I would say they were probably the best at doing like all the nutrition stuff because of the Edward guy. I think obviously this is just me guessing, but I feel like it has a pretty big impact when you have someone that just does it for you versus having to go out of your way and doing it for yourself.
Yeah.
So you can just focus on like the competition. But I think they're probably the only NA team that has brought people with them like that to like a LAN event, which is I think it's pretty important. I didn't really like realize it honestly until you just brought it up, but I feel like that might have been a reason that they had they had a really good run in Berlin, obviously top 4, and they beat Gambit and Ascend, who were probably 2 of the top 5 teams in the world. Obviously it's a completely different team now, but I think that them doing that was maybe had a part of the buying into like a system and doing what probably is right for your health. Obviously it's like everyone's like independent, but I think having someone like that is pretty important.
Yeah, and I think the thing that you're saying that like everyone's different is like a really big one too, because I think sometimes it's also easy to be like, well, we know that being healthy is like has positive impacts on cognition, but we also actually have no idea how cognition really like what is the like what are the causal links between that and performance in esports games, or specifically in attack. Like we don't really know any of the answers, so we're kind of shooting in the dark. But I think like you say, at least like making sure people are kind of healthy and happy, I think is a big one, because I think sometimes doing like if you give someone a regimen where it actually makes them unhappy, they're probably going to play worse, because happiness is actually more of a predictor, I think, for success in playing.
I would agree with that. I think which is also why like I think like personally I like sports psychologists a lot, like working with them, but I think it's something you have to buy into, or it's going to be completely like useless and you're just wasting both of your own times, right?
Yeah.
I think it's kind of similar in this regard. I think the health might be a little more important and like a little less optional, but I mean at the end of the day, obviously you can't make people do things really, but I think it's something that I think we'll probably try to look into going forward.
Yeah, it's one of those things too where, as you say, like I think it's easy not to even do it justice when you say it's quite individual, because I think when we're talking about performance, we're talking about optimizing human beings. So there is like a level of specificity there
There's
between
a
people
lot
that's
of, I
so
feel like
huge.
there's a really really big variance in like what, like, let's take like extreme examples. Like, there was a Polish team back in CS. Mihu, probably 5'5", 120 pounds, and then they have Rollin. This guy's like 6'7". I don't even know how. Like, he was a pretty big dude. It's like the nutritional needs between those two is going to be vastly different. So obviously, it's going to be like that's like an extreme, right? But even like people on the same team, like around the same height and weight, there's going to be big variances because of like where they come from, what they normally eat, their sleep schedules, and all things like that. It's like there's so much that goes into it that it's like really nuanced, I guess, and it's hard to like know what's right and what's wrong without a lot of trial and error.
And the same thing about like how much practice is good for one person
Yeah,
to the next
yeah.
person, or like
There's a lot of variance within it, and I think it's pretty bad to paint. I think esports does a really poor job at accepting like the individuality of people, and it's like if you're not doing the same thing as a team, like the best team in the world, then are you even trying? Like, obviously, I think teams should practice and put in like your best effort, but it's like some teams are capable of playing six to seven scrims a day. Other teams, it's going to burn them out.
yeah. I think this is one of the things that's actually missing is the fact that we don't have yet, I think, the individuals that have a really good like understanding of esports in itself. Like what does it take? Like, you know, someone that's been a professional player, maybe like someone who's actually been a pro player, but then also has decided that they want to get into coaching and then has spent an enormous degree of time also learning all of the nuanced
Yeah,
and or generating a nuanced understanding between like holistic like performance and health and so on, something that's more holistic. Because I think
yeah,
this happens a lot where you'll get someone who's a specialist at one thing, but the problem is that it's not one thing. It's a system where that one thing is a part of a system. So you have to have the whole system in mind to really understand how to get the most out of it, which is like the human body, for example, is an enormous amount of things. You can't just
yeah.
focus on any one thing. It's everything is a knock-on effect. So it's we don't really have people that have that degree of all those that
Yeah,
breadth of knowledge
yeah,
just yet. It's
I would
not. It's
agree.
a huge scarcity, I think. So
I think it's because esports is so young
yeah,
versus like traditional sports, right? Like there can be people. I mean, it's also I think it's a lot easier to study traditional sports because obviously they'll like the longevity of it, but it's also the people that have been players can probably have degrees and then they like also understand like what goes into it versus in esports like what I feel like the average career is probably maybe 3 5 years. Five might be pushing it. I'd say like 2 to 3 is probably realistic. I think it'll probably keep going up, but it's like there's in and out so fast and like how short it's been a thing, it's just probably unrealistic to expect people to completely understand it. I mean, obviously, you don't completely understand anything in life, honestly, ever. But I think in esports, it's a little more overblown with how perfect people expect things to be. I guess.
yeah, I totally agree. And it's another reason why I brought up the stuff with zombs, because you know what I'm seeing there is an athlete who is under immense mental stress from an external source, and they're responding. And it's like everybody's going to respond in different ways, not
Yeah.
making a comment as to the right and the wrong of anything, but more so to once again just understand the fact that the way that people feel, like their psychology, that even isn't necessarily to do with the game itself, but just how they're experiencing their life. If you have an athlete, like if you're looking at to training people to be the most elite athletes possible, everything matters. Everything is significant. Like how happy they are when they're outside of the server, when they're outside of the team environment is important. Do they have their shit together? That is important. If they don't
Yeah.
have their shit together, they're not going to have their shit together in the server either. So there is this like level to this as well in terms if we're talking about team support and like having the resources that kind of does go beyond just optimizing strategy, optimizing health,
Yeah.
but you
I
know
would
you
agree.
go into the how do I optimize this individual in their life as a human being, which is pretty deep. But if you
I
want to
think
go
like
all the way, that's how you do it.
yeah, but then like I feel like a lot of the reason that potentially maybe it's not invested into is the over like the career. What's the word? Overturn? Like
Um,
people going in and out of jobs. I don't
right?
remember
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, like so it's like the career length. Like maybe it's not worth for organizations to invest in like a player that might only be on their team for like 6 months, right? It's like can they really make meaningful can you like notice significant things in someone's life and help improve them within like what could be like a 3 to 6 months time period? Is it worth the investment? Obviously, it's different if like you have people locked down for years and you know that they're going to be there for a long time. I think it makes a lot more sense, like economically. But
Yeah.
maybe it's I don't know. I feel like it's probably hasn't been considered as much as it should. But I think that like the longer that esports is a thing, the more like flushed out things will get. And I think, I mean, even from when I first started like getting in esports in 2015, it's like it's still completely different now than it was back then, obviously. But I think it's taking like it takes really big steps, and then it'll go back, and then maybe some steps, and then back, and then it's like a tug of war, and nobody really knows what's going on. But I think it's going in the right direction, personally.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so too. I think it's
I think
sorry
it's just a
easy.
really, really slow process. It's really easy to like
Mhm.
just discredit everything, right?
Yeah, we
Which,
want everything now, and it's like we will always want
yeah,
everything now, but it's it's pretty complicated. Yeah, it's a lot of variance or things that we can't control that are also impacting things too that are frustrating. But I think this is another reason why I really like your philosophy and your focus on leadership, because I think one of the things that we can do, and I think that we should be having or being encouraged, whether it's by the GM or whoever it is that's senior that's not a part of the roster as well, is generating a culture that's very leadership forward, as well as um, you know a culture that is going to be the most successful in terms of the outcomes on the server. Because there's a lot of I feel like there's a lot of teams where the players will run things in ways which are really unhealthy, or you'll have teams where mistakes are demonized, as opposed to it should be it should be almost an exciting thing that there is a mistake. It should be that the whole team sees this as a growth opportunity. Things like this in the
yeah,
culture are really important to have, and to have trust in leadership to help guide that culture into existence. But I feel like there's lots of teams where the players kind of run the show,
yeah,
and
yeah.
it's not necessarily inherently bad, but just generally speaking, most players shouldn't be doing that. So
Yeah, I would agree. But I think that the CS organizations do a lot better job at it because they have been around. Like, there's people to do it, right? Whereas I feel like in Valorant, a lot of people that were in those positions in Counter Strike decided to become like coaches or like players or something again, or like maybe they just weren't playing. Like they could be veterans on a team. Like I think maybe a good example would be like a Hazed or something. Like he'd probably be a really really good GM, but he still wants to play. So it's like
yeah,
or like I just like all any of the older people, right? Like that's just one example. But I feel like they know how maybe they have a better idea of how a team should be ran than like a younger guy, but they still have it in them to compete and they still want to compete. Versus like in like Counter Strike, like there's Zonic, there's Blade, there's who's the newest Charlotte Aid, his name is, and then there's
Eighth,
like all the
yeah.
there's all these like really really like experienced coaches. They've been around forever. They know this is what they want to do, but and like they do a good job at it. But like Gahey, the Furia coach, also is another one. Like Apoka, like all these people. But then in like Valorant, it's like maybe they get like a second breath or something, where they could be like the best coach in the world, but they're still like wanting to compete in things like that.
And it's interesting too, because I feel like those names might have a better chance at possibly getting again structure, like in within the org structure. There needs to be a level of trust between the GM and
Yeah,
the
yeah,
powers that be, where the GM can be like, look, I know what I'm doing in terms of player development. We're not gonna kick people off this roster, because I like part of the point of having me here is that I will not only build a culture, but I will develop the players. So
yeah,
if
yeah,
there are problems now, sure, that's fine, but I'm confident through my methodologies that I will develop these players into different roles that they need to be in, or I will be able to solve the issues that are at play. But I feel like that doesn't exist in most cases. We're seeing, like you say, we're seeing just the kind of revolving door of roster moves, and I wondered
yeah,
if this happened with 100 Thieves. I felt like maybe that was a situation where it just needed someone that the players respected to be able to dictate the way, in a way that was obviously not like an authoritarian regime, but like a relationship of respect and trust in that person, and then having that person kind of doing the right things to make sure the roster's good, as
yeah,
opposed to maybe things kind of becoming schisms. Maybe a couple players are unhappy, they start talking to each other, and then suddenly there starts to be like just bad dynamics going on in the team, and then maybe that forces them to split up sooner than they should ever have, perhaps.
Yeah. I think it's a lot of the lack of proper. I don't know if authority is the right word, but like just higher ups, like what you're saying. Like I think that's probably one of the bigger things that at least the North American scene is missing. Maybe it's better in Europe, but yeah, I think that's probably one of the bigger things that like we're lacking is like a scene at the current moment. But I think given the time, I think it will resolve itself because I think that the people that would excel in those jobs will probably eventually end up getting there. That's how I think it'll go. I'm also pretty optimistic. Maybe that's not how it's gonna go, but that's what I think is gonna happen. And
Yeah.
I don't know. I also think that North America is still. I mean, I said it before. It's like the matches that we play against Europe. I mean, all the regions are like really, really close. Like every region is really close. It's not like there's like a dominant region, in my opinion, at least, obviously. But I don't know.
Yeah, we'll definitely get there. I mean, hey, if this casting thing
Yeah.
doesn't work out, I'm going to try my hand at the GM thing, see if I can get someone to give me a chance. But it is going to be interesting to keep tabs on player development in general. I know that recently there was also this discussion within an A again, which, and you'll be quite aware of this, of like, okay, well, we're importing people now because we don't have enough IGLs. So what's the deal with that, and why is that happening?
Well, I think like the biggest issue with like the importing, it's just kind of sad that these organizations, like these lower tier organizations, are just holding people for like $500,000 buyouts when you're paying them like $2,000 a month. Like, how is that legal? Like, obviously, I know they signed the contract, but I just feel like that shouldn't be a thing. Like,
Yep.
there's some organizations who are charging like, I mean, it's been talked about. It's like 300K for like these, like the SOAR guys, like Cryo says and Xander. It's like, I feel like there's no way you're compensating them justifiably enough to try to hold them to those buyouts. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm stupid. Whatever. But it's not even just those two. Those are just like the two biggest name examples I feel like that have been a thing as of recent. But like behind closed doors, like if I hear like, because obviously all the teams are trying to make roster changes, they're trying to like pick up these North American players, but it just doesn't make any financial sense. Like, why am I going to spend $300,000 on someone who is an unknown quantity with like zero social media presence, like no accomplishments? Like, yeah, they could be really good, but how do I justify this to my organization that is already investing a lot of money in the scene?
Yeah.
It's just odd. It's like I don't think I think North America is kind of shooting itself in the foot, whereas I'm not sure that Europe is in the same way. Because I feel like at least in Europe, like roster changes can happen. North America, it's really, really difficult for a lot of these teams to make changes that potentially could make them better. And I don't know, it kind of sucks to see, but esports, nothing really makes sense in esports.
Yeah. Well, I do wonder as well if, like you say, you asked the question, like, is that even legal? Like, it's,
Yeah.
people often put stuff in contracts that is not legal,
Yeah.
or that they're just because it's in a contract doesn't necessarily, like, there's in the UK, for example, there's a thing called the Unfair Contract Terms Act. So it's like which will like specifically
Yeah.
prevent a company from withholding liability on like certain things, like
Yeah, like I'm
death
not
and loss of
completely
limb
sure
and-
if it's like it's odd. But also
Yeah,
like another thing that I feel like shouldn't be allowed is I've heard that some organizations, if a player asks for a buyout clause, either they'll set it to be like completely absurd. Like you're paying 3K a month. This guy's on a 2-year contract, but that's 72K for 2 years, and they're gonna put him on a $600,000 set buyout. Like, how is that fair? Why does or even they just another thing that I've heard happen is, hey, I want a set buyout, and I'm not gonna sign without it. Well, they just don't sign you. It's like you're just like stuck in like rock in a hard place, right? It's
right.
like, what do you do?
Yes, does definitely seems like there needs to be. I mean, I guess a few different things happening. If this stuff is very damaging for the professional ecosystem in Valorant esports, then I'd be interested to see. I mean, well, firstly, this won't survive probably these practices most likely when when we get to a point
Oh
of
yeah.
franchising.
I
Presumably,
agree because I
'Cause-
think that a lot of these organizations, like I think pretty much all of it is, we know we're probably not going to get it franchising. Let's try to make as much money as we can.
yeah,
Is essentially what that's like what I'm like if I was them, that's what I'm assuming their thought process is. It's like we know we're not going to get in. Let's try to make $500,000 or whatever the number might be. But
yeah.
yeah, I think it will get better over time, but it's just kind of sad to see, I guess. Like just like the scene is just limiting itself because you could form such great teams with these people. Like they could have such bright futures, and you're potentially limiting them because you want to hold them against their own will. Even when
Yeah.
like organizations are completely willing to pay like $100,000, $150,000. No, but you want to charge $300,000 for someone who's a completely unknown quantity. It's odd to me.
It's shitty. I think that's
It's
just gonna
not.
call it what it is. It's just shitty,
It's just yeah. I mean,
really
it's just
shitty.
life though, right? Like, there's gonna be shitty business, like shitty stuff in like all of our lives, but it sucks to see, I guess, because like I'm friends with all these people that are getting put in these situations. It's like, well, I mean, do you want to get signed? Do you want to get paid? So you can keep playing full time, even though it's not like the ideal contract,
Yeah.
or you want to hope someone else signs you with a better contract? But it's like,
I'd be like
yeah,
personally really interested to know the people that are making those business choices, just because one of the one of the consequences of stuff like this is that people won't like you. If you're going to do something shitty, people are not going to like you, and you should be information that you bear in mind when doing business with certain organizations. It's
yeah,
because that stuff is not, because whether or not that is ethical or not, you can make a bunch of different arguments, I'm sure. Whether or not that's legal or not, I don't even know. But the point
I
is
have
that
no
it
clue.
is
But it's
definitely
just like it's just
damaging
really bad.
to,
It's just damaging the ecosystem.
yeah, and that
Like,
sucks.
yeah. It's like people are trying to. I've seen like people try to paint it. I'm like, oh, because TenZ got sold for $1 million. It's like, yeah, I don't think you can really compare this guy who has 2,000 Twitter followers and has never opened Twitch.tv to one of the faces of like NA esports, right?
Yeah,
Like this guy turns on his live stream, he has 30,000 viewers. You're not only paying for TenZ the player, you're paying for TenZ the brand.
so
It's
he's a
just like,
TV channel basically.
yeah,
Like,
it's like this guy turned his stream on 30,000 viewers instantly. Of course he's gonna be worth a lot of money. But like, where does the justification come in from asking for that much money when they don't provide that much value to even your
mhm.
company? Obviously, you don't think they're very valuable because of how much salary you're paying them. So it's like, how is it? I don't know. It's just people suck. I guess that's really all it is. People fucking
it's
suck.
it is a funny one because, like you say, when if at the point franchising does happen and so on, at that point, regardless as to whether or not someone hires a lawyer and says, okay, let's figure out if there is a workaround on this, if I
Yeah.
can make the argument that this is like an unfair business practice or something and get myself out this shitty contract, that's one thing. But if it gets to the franchise system, right, will be heavily incentivized to make sure that these kinds of practices are not happening within the teams, and they'll probably
Yeah.
they might exert controls over that kind of those kinds of behaviors. So in that sense, that is one of the benefits, because in Counter-Strike suffers a lot because it is a complete just open free market, and Valve are completely hands off. So there's no one really setting any rules, any limitations, or anything. It's just you just got to figure it out. And because there's nothing that exists, that means that a lot of shitty things will happen. They just will happen.
Yeah.
And
No, I think a good example, kind of what happened in NA, or what's happening now in NA Valorant is like, I think back, the CIS orgs are really bad about this kind, like the similar thing. It's like, I remember Navi tried to buy somebody. I don't remember exactly who it was, like Flit or something, and the organization was asking for like $1 million. It's like, I don't know. It's just odd. It's like, yeah, you don't want to sell your best player, but then you're completely like not helping them put their best interest forward. So obviously, like there needs to be like a middle ground, but I think it's just kind of that's just kind of sad,
yeah,
to be honest, to see it.
and I
Like
think
obviously, like it is a business and you need to make money, but I feel like there also should be like a little bit of humanity involved. Like if an organization is going to compensate you fairly enough, then I don't think it should be something like that's capable of just completely holding someone against their will when they don't want to be there. Like, yeah, it's different. Like, you shouldn't just have to let people go. But if an organization is willing to compensate you, then yeah, I feel like it should be like a no-brainer. At least for me. Obviously, I'm not like an org
yeah.
runner. Maybe I'm stupid, but maybe I'm an
Yeah,
idiot. But
yeah,
I mean,
yeah, yeah.
I just feel like I don't know. It just makes sense. Like, I feel like all the roster moves we see in like Europe and stuff is because the orgs are a little more fair. I don't know if fair is the right word. I
The,
feel
the
like that's not the
culture
right
around
word.
it is just different, I guess, in many senses.
Yeah. I think
But
it's a completely like giant culture difference.
I think we were talking off camera a little bit about situation with agencies as well. And I think that is also another thing whereby we don't have a lot of great representation in any category in esports at the moment. It feels like it's quite scarce, and so that's a problem too, because in reality, you know, it's in a business negotiation, it's a negotiation. You know, you're you know, the party that has more leverage will likely have a contract that is an agreement that's a little bit more biased towards them because they've got more leverage. It's just kind of how it works. But there is a certain point at which, you know, if a contract is so extremely one-sided, it just, you know, that does suck, and it sucks if it's eating away at let's say the professional scene. If that's like really deteriorating the professional scene, those kinds of business practices, it kind of sucks. Again, like you say, it's like there's not much you can really do about this necessarily, but it does suck that there are people doing that, because in reality as well, there should be some balance to the thinking that you're looking at the long term with this. And so, you know, reputation matters. The health of the system that you're a part of matters. So trying to make the short-term gain shouldn't, in theory, be a sensible business decision, as opposed to being a good player, a good actor in the market. Should be of more interest in someone that's doing good business. He'll probably make a lot more money in the long term. But yeah, it's an interesting one.
It's esports. That's pretty much all it is. Esports is. I think the longer you're in it, the less sense it makes. That's about what I've gathered from it in like my 4 years, 5 years, whatever. The longer I'm around, like, just starts to make less and less sense. Maybe that's just life, though. I'm not really sure.
Yeah, because you just like It's like the thing whereby the more you know, the more you realize how little you know. So it's one of those things. Circling back to TenZ a little bit. I want to talk about TenZ a little bit, just because I don't want to, again, this is not in any sense like calling him out for a bad performance, because, you know, usually what I like to talk about is the dilemmas players are facing. And, you know, he had a bad performance, and it was definitely a mental game situation for him, but he's an incredible player. So one of the things that's interesting is, again, if we're talking about like if you have a good team with good support structure and systems, you'll be able to deal with these issues. Like, you know, you'll be able to come back from mental game problems and so on and so forth. And I know he has insane amounts of pressure on him. Like you said, you didn't even say he's the NA face of Valorant. You said he's the NA face of esports, which when you said that, I was like, because at first I was like, oh, he's going to say Valorant, but then you said esports. I'm like, actually, yeah, that actually seems more applicable.
I think easily top 5 most like recognizable faces in any esports. I can't think of. I mean, obviously I'm from Valorant, but like, I would say at this point he's probably surpassed like all of the CS people. Like the North American players, I don't think there's any of them that compare to him.
Yeah, he just caught fire. His brand just caught fire. It's incredible. Yeah. It's like, you know,
like, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think like Tarek might be the closest.
Yeah. Then,
but after that, it's like, I guess Stewie, like Tarek and Stewie are like the people that are like, Hiko. So I think that would be like the 3 from like FPS, and then there's like Bjergsen, like Sneaky. So maybe not top 5, but he is one of the faces of NA esports.
But like Elige as well, but like Elige feels like small compared to TenZ, which is weird.
I think Elige is a lot bigger in Counter, obviously, because he's a Counter-Strike pro. But I think TenZ has a bigger reach in like the casual fan base versus an Elige. But I also think that leans itself into Valorant being more of like a game with like a casual fan base versus Counter-Strike.
Yeah.
I think a lot more people casually play Valorant than they do Counter-Strike.
Yeah. Well, if you know, with how big he is, you know, it is crazy. Like it does feel. I feel like there is a crippling sense of pressure for him that he has to deal with. That's probably more than most people. But the thing is that at the same time, I know that before he was this big, you know, he did have issues with some of these areas of his game anyway. And again, why I think I don't like the term choking, only because not because it's necessarily inaccurate, but only because I feel like it's heavily stigmatized, when in reality, you know, a mental game issue is just really like any other issue in your game that causes poor performances. It just can be a bit more catastrophic, but it can be solved like everything else. So with TenZ, how do you kind of perceive his the struggle that he had at Champions?
I think it's hard to like I don't remember. I didn't watch the matches super closely, so I'm not really sure like how poorly he played, if he played poorly at all. I think I've seen people tweeting about it or like Reddit poster stuff, but it's like,
Yeah.
I don't think it's completely fair to say he's like a bad player because of one event. Like maybe if it continuously happens, maybe sure, but even then, it's like I think they kind of struggled as a team. Obviously, like he's the superstar. He should be like in the public eye, he should be the one that like carries them across the finish line, right? But it's not always like that easy. So I mean, it's hard to like completely understand it without like knowing the team or like the environment and stuff like that. But I think it's I don't know how to like word it. I can like understand. I mean, I can understand like the pressure, not necessarily because like, I feel like it's just such a weird circumstance to be in. Like that entire event was just odd. Like everything about it, like behind the scenes stuff that'll probably never go public was just interesting. Like nobody really knew what was going on half the time. But I mean, it sucks to have a bad event, and like especially when you're so big, like you're gonna get scrutinized a lot more than like
Yeah.
someone else having a bad event. What did I just do? Oh, I pressed the button on my keyboard and then made a noise. But yeah, no, I think obviously when you're that big, like you're gonna get scrutinized a lot more than anyone else having an off event.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's a difficult one too, because I think, like you said, there's like a lot of factors going on. It's never going to be one thing most of the time. And yeah. I don't know, like no one knows precisely how the team dynamic works with Sentinels. Like if it was the case that they had a negative attitude or atmosphere going into some of their games, if like the key individuals who bring the kind of the positivity, if they were struggling and so that piece was missing, and then that has a knock-on effect, or if it's like there's a lack of a sense of preparedness going into the event. Maybe it was because they didn't practice as much as they did before the previous event, and then TenZ is feeling like, oh shit, I have to carry for us to win.
Maybe he has to like,
which
he
is
tries
a bad
to
thing to
overcompensate or
think.
something. Yeah, maybe that I also didn't even think of that. Yeah, he could have like, maybe their prep wasn't as good as they would have liked it to be, so he was trying to overcompensate, which sucks, but it's the reality. Like you're not always going to go into every event 100% prepared.
There's this thing that I loved how, because when I had like Jared Tendler on, who I don't know, I don't know if I'll like get onto someone else's stuff at some point, but like I'm still like on his material. I think his materials are great in terms of the mental game. But I asked him this question about confidence, because in his last book as well, there was like this huge chapter about confidence, and in pro gaming in CS, it's like the thing that people would say all the time, like, oh, CS is a confidence game. Like everyone would say that. It's like this ubiquitously understood, everyone understands that this is like the most important thing about Counter-Strike. It's a confidence game. But if you ask people what confidence is, they don't know what the fuck it is. It's like
nobody has any clue what it is.
Like, yeah. What is that? So
I think I listened to you talk about this with someone else before.
Yeah, it is.
But yeah, no, it's like everyone says it's all confidence, but it's like nobody can even describe it, right? Like exactly. I can't even do it, right? But it's like it's the same thing. It makes sense. I feel like it's really hard to completely quantify exactly what it means.
It's that's the funny thing, is that I think like that you use the key word there, which is a quantify, because that's got to be the start. We got to be scientific about this, or as scientific as we can be. And because Jared is like, well, simple. Confidence is just an emotion, and it's like, okay, cool. And then he went on to talk more about it, but the stuff in his book about confidence, it tends to be about the idea of it's all about what leads you into making mistakes and what leads you into performing your best. And so he will talk about underconfidence being the fact that it's an underestimation of your ability. So if your ability is X, then being below X means that your estimation of your abilities is less than what it actually is. So that means you're underconfident. So that's like a situation where someone's like beating you on every peak, and so suddenly, because you're losing out on these aim battles that you feel like normally you would be winning, and then maybe that person's just on a tear or something, now you're kind of underestimating your own abilities, and so you're going to be making decisions that are kind of out of whack with actually how good you are. So suddenly you have a confidence issue, and the same thing can happen in the opposite, where you're too confident, so you're estimating your abilities over what they actually are, and then that's a problem too, because then you'll make decisions which will not go very well because you're not good enough to do those things. So
Yeah,
it's
yeah, yeah.
like it's a weird thing because when you see somebody like TenZ and with the playstyle that he has, you've got to be supremely confident, and that's something that is kind of ramping up and down all the time based on the outcomes of the game and also what's happening around you. So there's lots of things that can impact how confidently you're playing in the game, outside of the game as well as inside of the game. So it is an super interesting thing to think about because lots of players struggle with confidence, and sometimes players will try to win confidence by doing things where they're being overconfident, and
Yeah.
that's also a bad thing to do because then you're going to make more mistakes. Then you'll be like, now I'm mentally boomed, I can't do anything right, like I'm trying to be really
Yeah,
confident, but that fucks up, and I'm underconfident now, and playing too tight fucks me up. Like, what do I do? So it's hard, man. Yeah, there's my little spiel on confidence. But no, it's really interesting to see how this works out in these live environments. Speaking of TenZ, but I'll move on from him. I think people will like TenZ is an incredible player. He just has like an issue in his game clearly in like some of these moments to solve, and there's maybe loads of other things around it. So I hope that people who are listening to this, if they had felt like they'd read all these posts about TenZ and think that he's like a terrible player or something, they think a little bit more about it. It's a bit more complicated than that. He's a great player. Do you agree?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, cool.
I mean, he was the best player in NA for like easily like most of this year. I think like the only person that came close for this year was Ye, internationally at least.
Do you think star level players or star players have the same level of impact as maybe they would in a Counter-Strike? Or do you think that because of the nature of Valorant, that someone like, if you put Simple into Valorant, that he wouldn't be as impactful on a game as he is in Counter-Strike?
I think it's hard to like one-to-one it exactly, but like I think that given like the right circumstances, I think it's possible to have like a similar level. But I also think it's easier to be a superstar in Valorant because of the nature of the game, right? Like there's just like healers, there's people that can throw like darts where you can like say you're Jet, right? You can like dash into a smoke, you get a Sova dart, you can get a kill through a smoke. It's just that's not a thing in Counter-Strike, right? So I think it's easier to set up your superstars in Valorant than it is to be a superstar in Counter-Strike. But I think that given like the right circumstances in both games, it's possible for anyone with like the mechanical capabilities to do either one. Obviously, maybe not at like the same levels, but I think it's possible.
So speaking of superstar players, then, and I agree with everything that you said. I think obviously one thing that we saw from Leaf's first international LAN is we saw some like glimpses of some like really crazy shit from Leaf, and it definitely shows that he has a pretty insane level that he can go to. And I feel like he is such a new player still that it's quite exciting to see that he's doing that. And in terms of Leaf, I think it was also kind of clear that he probably made some mistakes as well, with how he was playing, possibly also. Like he's really, I feel like he's like a diamond in the rough. He's like raw and unrefined, but the potential is absolutely there. And so we're going to see him improving and improving, and he's going to get scarier and scarier. How is it playing with Leaf? And in terms of what is well, I'll start there. Like, how is it playing with Leaf?
I mean, he's honestly like one of the best teammates you can have. Like he kind of like, I think me and him are probably the most similar, like personality wise, like as teammates. Like we kind of tilt sometimes, but it doesn't like get to us too much. But I mean, there's really nothing like to complain about with him. I mean, he plays Jet, so he's kind of cringe, but that's about it. But yeah, no, there's really nothing like, I have nothing really bad to say. Like I don't really think he has any downsides.
That's awesome. That's obviously a huge thing going forward. And in terms of where he needs to, like where are the, if you could put your finger on any, let's say, things he needs to get better at or work on to get to that next level, to like really unlock his potential, what would you say that those things would be?
I think like maybe the biggest thing that he could improve on would be like, I don't know, in the current meta, I think the operators Jet, it's just you can only op on Jet. So I think that's like the one area he doesn't op what I think is enough. But I also think that he's so good with a rifle that maybe it's not necessary. But I think we haven't had enough time for him to experiment completely with both options. So I think that's probably something that if given like the meta of Valorant is the same, where Jet is the meta duelist, then hopefully that's something we can explore and add into our arsenal. But I don't think it's like I don't think it's like team changing. Like I don't think if he's able to opt that it completely makes our team like infinitely better. Like he's good with it now, but I mean like on like a level of like a Yay who's like going to buy an op regardless. I think it's pretty obnoxious to play against, or like a CNED, like CNED ops like pretty much any chance he gets, and he's really really strong with it. I think that's like the weakness that he has, but I mean it's also because he switched to Jet like what, maybe 2 months before this event, maybe three. I think he's been playing Jet for about 3 months since I joined. He's started playing Jet, so yeah, about 3 months. But it's like it makes sense that he's not completely comfortable using the op yet. But I think that's probably one thing that we're gonna try to work on moving forward, given that the meta stays the same, obviously.
Yeah, and it does seem at least like Jet will probably be somewhat of a mainstay. And until there's a world where banning agents is in play, I don't think Jet's going to ever be an agent that's not picked at an event.
Yeah.
It's going to be
Yoru or Phoenix.
0%. Dude, that's a good point. The Yoru changes, man. If they didn't even release all of the changes, but what they like the whole like trend though of what we did see, it feels like he's going to be mega awesome. I think
it'll be cool.
Yeah.
I think the issue though is like if you don't nerf Jet or Raze, I don't think he's better than either of them still, because you can rely on their abilities more consistently. At least this is how I look at it. Like as like a pro IGL, you want consistency within like your agent pool, like your agent. Sorry, like so. It seems like his Yoru's new changes would be more of like still it's like a gimmick essentially, which aren't bad. Like it's good to have like pocket strats and stuff like that, but I think that it's a lot easier to rely on like a Jet and a Raze consistently than it is a Yoru, even with like the perceived buffs. At least in my point of view so far. That's without playing with them. We're playing against it obviously, but like still, I think that Jet or Raze in their current state are better than Yoru in his proposed state. But this is all hypothetical, of course. So it's like the perceived value. Like maybe the value of Yoru is higher, but how consistently can you reach that value where it's worth it to sacrifice Jet or Raze?
And maybe there's like some value that goes up when an agent's new and people don't know how, like exactly all the ways to use him or counter him, and then it kind of goes away over time too. So that's a cool thing about Valorant is too that we have.
I'm a big fan of the like meta changes and like agent changes. I think it's really cool.
Yeah, me too. It makes it very interesting as a caster. Like, I was prepping the matches with Sean and at Champions, and it's like something that I like CS events. Like, we never really got much opportunity to do that so much because the CS match is like so long when you are working, and it's also very difficult to prep. Like, teams will run defaults, and then if you've watched that team play a bunch, you understand the micro and the macro of the game. You kind of understand what's going on, really. Like you just have to understand like how they do various setups, and then you're kind of good. But in Valorant, it's like actually it's a lot of specificity you can kind of go into about because of the agent compositions and that and the defaults and like understanding the points of contention between those compositions and like the style of play. It's just
I think the coolest thing about Valorant is like you can play your own style and it can work. I feel like in Counter-Strike, like the only team that's ever attempted to play their own style was Furia, and we've seen like the wavering levels of success with it. Obviously, there's different styles of Counter-Strike also, but I think in Valorant it's cool how you don't have to play by the meta, right?
Yeah.
I think Counter-Strike is more so about playing perfect, and Valorant's about figuring out what works for you, and I like that. I think it's cool. I think both games are great, but I mean, I think if we're on Twitter, you can only say you like one or the other. So
yeah.
But I don't know. I think it's really cool how like nuanced it can be with like the agent metas and stuff like that. It's pretty cool. I like the diversity it adds.
Yeah, I think I'm totally with you on that. That was like I think the sentiments that I think we had those sentiments right at the beginning of Immortal Minds, like when we were talking about this game. We're like that's why we're like, this is why this game excites us, because
it's just like
that's how it's different, and it's nice that it's different.
I mean, it's cool to like perfect the game, right? Like what Navi's doing right now, or like Astralis. But I think it's also just as cool to like create your own meta and establish it, even if it can go away. It's like then you get to do the work again. Maybe some people don't like that, but I think it's really cool to like always have to continuously like try to create new stuff. I think it's pretty awesome.
There was this old argument in the Quake community a long time ago. Well, I guess it's still going on maybe, but it was this sense of it's definitely this way in Quake world, like Quake 1, where like everyone's very rooted in their ways. And the sense was that you shouldn't have new maps. We have the amount of maps that we need. You shouldn't have new maps, because maps are what like changes. Well, if you have a new map, you've got to learn loads of new stuff. And suddenly, and the argument was that it should be about playing the maps that we know and then perfecting those. And that's going to be that'll take more skill than playing new maps less optimized or something like that. Like that was kind of like the thinking. And it's like, actually, the problem with that is that, you don't have this world now where someone who is good at innovating, good at understanding the game and the mechanics of the game, and is able to kind of extrapolate that out into different kind of maps and so on. That person doesn't get to do that anymore. So like that person who's really smart doesn't get to be rewarded for that.
I think that's kind of similar to like the two Counter-Strike and Valorant, right? It's like that in Counter-Strike, it's the same every time. Like very little changes. There's very little variance in it. So it's like it's cool to have like another option, obviously.
Yeah, it kind of rewards the grinders and doesn't reward the smarter people as much.
Like there's nothing wrong with either way, right? It's just some people like to continuously learn. Some people like to perfect something.
Yes. Yeah,
I think that's like the easiest way to describe it. It's like
beautiful.
Some people want to continuously like put effort, like the learning effort in. Some people just want to perfect like a craft, which there's absolutely nothing wrong with either of them.
I think I completely agree with how you put that. I think that was very well said. And it's funny because that's what's funny about this, is that like people are like, oh, Counter-Strike versus Valorant. It's like, no, they are two different things. You're allowed to like different things. Do you like the same? Do you only like one band? Who only likes one band? I mean, there are some people, I guess, but
very few and far between. Yeah.
But yeah, it's variety is the spice of life and all that. But yeah, with that said, because I can just ask you here on the podcast, I feel like we have like a pretty easygoing rapport. So yeah, you seem pretty down for conversations and stuff. So I think it's a good time to wrap up, because I feel like there's a lot that I can talk to you about, and I don't want to lead us into like a 5-hour conversation.
3-hour podcast.
Yeah. So yeah, it's been awesome getting some of your thoughts, and we didn't talk super deeply on any one topic. Like we didn't really get into the kind of the nuts and bolts of VCT and everything. But having played, close the year out with Cloud9, I feel like I really like I love your team. I love all of the individuals in your team. I think it's a great dynamic. I really love also the coaching staff that you have. Like, I got to speak to Autumn a little bit recently, and he's kind of behind the scenes, so I feel quite blessed to get to chat with him a little bit. And of course, James IRL, also fantastic individual. So I feel like you guys are really killing it in terms of the whole system that you got going on here. So please tell me you guys are gonna be sticking together and continuing to crush it throughout 2022.
That's the plan.
Awesome. That's great. Fantastic.
Hopefully more LAN events. That's the only thing. More LAN is better. But who knows how COVID's gonna go? So I might be playing online all year again.
Oh no. Oh god. Well, fingers crossed. But with that said, is there anything people should keep their eye out in terms of like stuff that you're doing? Like, are you going to be streaming, making content? I guess you're on Twitter and everything.
I stream pretty much every day when I'm at home. It's a lot more lackluster when I'm at events, because it's harder to have like a super consistent stream schedule with like randomly you have to wake up at 9 a.m. for like COVID tests or things like that. But yeah, I stream pretty much every day when I'm at home, which is for the foreseeable future. Next few months, probably 3 months, I would guess, before travel starts up again, which is exciting to actually be able to stream consistently again.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for jumping on and having a chat, and I look forward to future chats if you have the time. And have a happy Christmas, happy holidays, and I'll speak to you soon.
Yeah, thank you.